Good evening guys, and welcome to another Tipsy Goat DeckTech. My name is Edwin, and today I will be talking about Mimeoplasm Revered One, or as I like to call it, my Swiss pocket knife. Mimeoplasm is a Sultai Ooze legendary creature that says when it enters, exile up to X creature cards from your graveyard. It enters with 3 +1/+1 counters on it for each creature card exiled this way, and you can pay 2 so that Mimeoplasm becomes a copy of target creature exiled with it, except it's 0/0 and has this ability. So we can't get the enter the battlefield effects that some creatures like, but we can get the leave the battlefield or just some sweet static effect. Before we get further into the video, I would like to remind you that most of the people watching this aren't subscribed. It is a really easy way to help the channel out, help us grow, and help us to keep making content like this one. Thank you very much. Let's first look at the archetype we are going to build. If you remember, those are aggro, control, mid-range and combo. And combo is usually a combination of aggro combo or control combo. Mimeoplasm is a classic mid-range deck because he wants to mill, he wants a lot of mana because he needs X, and then he also needs the 2 to become a copy of a target creature. So that is of course what I did here as well. In brewing this deck, I decided to focus on Mimeoplasm as a kind of Voltron Commander. So give it haste, give it hexproof, indestructible, maybe phase it out, give it infect of course. So we have a couple of board wipes, we have 8 cards that increase the power on Mimeoplasm. We have card advantage because milling is sweet, but if you don't have a lot of recursion, it isn't really card advantage. Of course we have evasion, so make it unblockable. Give it flying, whatever you need to deal the combat damage. Of course we have some cards that give haste as well, some cards that give infect, so we can finish off our opponents. We have 14 cards to mill because we do want to consistently mill. We only have 2 pieces of recursion because we want to stick to the main theme in being Voltron. Of course we have removal. We have 9 pieces to protect it. You only want 1 piece at a time, so you don't want to go too high, but you do want to consistently hit a protection piece. Of course we have 8 ramp cards, and we have what I like to call ramp harder cards that do give you ramp, but only when a certain criteria is met. So for instance, this Goldvein Hydra only gives tap treasure tokens when it dies. So let's dive into those sweet cards. So first off, ramping, not too much special going on here. We have the birds, of course, Cultivate, Dark Ritual, Farseek, that gives you a land, a Malevolent Ramble that gives you a silence, so just a one-time mana, but also lets you mill 4 and put a permanent card from among them into your hand. Nature's Lore, pretty much like the Farseek, and Kai's Shroud Claim is perfect of course because you can tutor up 2 forest cards, but they don't say basic forest, so just any 2 forest really lets you fix really well, and a Soul Ring of course. Then we have a couple of cards to give us even more mana. Matsalantli is a looter, but if you can transform it, and as we are milling, you can quite easily get the delirium going on. You can tap it to add X mana of any 1 color, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. So if you have this one out, you can just go through all of the abilities of the Mimeoplasm and the creatures exiled with it. In one term. Nyx Bloom Ancient of course gives trample. It is 7 mana and says whenever you tap a permanent for mana, it produces 3 times as much of those mana instead. So if you have 4 lands, you now have 12 mana. Omenalker says tap it to add a generic and a blue. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. Sphinx of the Second Sun, a 6/6 flyer that says at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, there's an additional beginning phase after this phase. I also talk about this card in the DeckTech on Hashaton, where I also explained that this one gives you an additional beginning phase, but when your post-combat main phase is already over. So you do need to spend this mana on instant speed, and as we want to play Mimeoplasm on turn 6, we exile 3 creatures with it. We spent our mana, and now we get our mana back on the additional beginning phase, so we can protect it the same rotation and use the other shenanigans exiled with it. Training grounds, of course, abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. So instead of 2, it's now 1 mana. But the difference is just so huge, because let's say you have a cool static ability, you have an evasion ability, and you have a protection ability. If you want to go from one to the other, instead of 6 mana, you're now only paying 3 mana. So we have all the mana we need. How are we going to protect it? For instance, this Crackplate Baloth. It is a 7 mana creature, can't be countered, has a kicker, but we'll probably never cast it. Why we want it is it has hexproof and haste. Same for this Giggling Skitter Spike that has indestructible, and it also says whenever attacks or blocks or becomes the target of a spell, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So whenever you unblock with it or it becomes block, most of the time you will have 3 creatures exiled with it, so it's a 9/9. So you'll do 9 damage, but it also has Monstrosity 5. If this creature isn't monstrous, put 5 +1/+1 counters on it and it becomes monstrous. So from a 9/9, it now becomes a 14/14. Invisible Stalker says hexproof and it's unblockable. Rainbow Ifrit is probably the coolest card out there that says flying, and for 2 mana we can phase out. If you haven't seen this mechanic before, phasing out means it's just not there until your next upkeep. It isn't blinked, so it's still the same object. It doesn't have leave the battlefield or enter the battlefield triggers. It just phases out. It's not there for a moment. We also have Ripples of Potential, 2 mana instant that says proliferate, then choose any number of permanents you control that had a counter put on them this way. Those permanents phase out. Most of the time it's just gonna be a Mimeoplasm, but some other creatures do put counters on themselves as well. So it might be a 2 mana save 2 creatures. Grix is very nice. It is a 5 mana flying infect, and for 1 black you can also give it haste until end of turn, and by paying 2 black you can also regenerate it. Regenerate means the next time it is destroyed, instead just tap it, so it's not destroyed. It can survive removal or board wipes. Valgavoth, a very cool card. I have a DeckTech on it as well that I put out on Duskmourn last year. It is a 9 mana 9/9 Elder Demon with flying and a lifelink, and also a ward, does the protection. Sacrifice 3 non-land permanents. If a card you didn't control would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead during your turn, but also whenever there's board wipe and you can make sure that this one has indestructible, all the cards go into the graveyard, and during your turn all those creature cards you can just play them by paying life instead of mana. Venentrope, a pretty cool card that has flying, death touch and hexproof, so it also has evasion. Yahenni gives it haste, and it also says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Yahenni. You can also sacrifice another creature to give it indestructible until end of turn. So these are just 9 ways to make sure that we have either phase out, indestructible or hexproof. And of course we need some cards to make sure that when we have 10 damage, we can just kill them like blue and black like to do. We have a creature with Invect and it's unblockable. Another with flying Invect, as we saw Skitterix, and another flying infect that also says pay for proliferate. Proliferate means choose any number of permanents and or players with counters on them, then give each another counter that's already there. Now to get all those cards in our graveyard, we of course need to mill. Aftermath Analyst says when adds to the battlefield, mill 3 cards. You can pay 4 and sacrifice it to return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Cemetery Tampering says Hideaway 5. And also at the beginning of your upkeep you may mill 3 cards. Then if there are 20 or more, you may play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. So this is pretty cool, but we just need to mill 3 cards every turn. Deck More Salvage has Dredge 2. Doom Whisperer says pay 2 life, Servile 2. Also has Flying and Trample, pretty great. Hedron Crab says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, target player mills 3. Which is just gonna be you, because we need all the mill we can get. Kitza, Likeness, Looter and Ledger Shredder all do a looting, which means draw a card, discard a card, but Likeness, Looter and Kitza just do it once per turn. Ledger Shredder do it whenever a player casts their second spell each turn. We also have Life from the Loam that says return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand, and Dread 3. Rumble we already saw, and of course my favorite mill card that just goes in any deck that I built with a mill team. It's a 2-mana artifact that says whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So if you have 5 permanents tapped, permanents of course include land, then you have to mill 5. So on each of our turns we'll at least mill for all the lands we have, which is probably gonna be something from 3 until 8 or 9, and the milling, yeah, let's say 4 or 5 on its own is already great. We have Old Stick Fingers, that is a Golgari X. When you cast a spell, review cards from the top of your library until you review X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard, then put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And its power and toughness are each equal to the number of creature cards in your graveyard. So pay 5 mana and you mill until you mill 3 creature cards. So this is a perfect setup before you play Mimeoplasm, because this one always hits creatures. And the Rampant Frogantua, I haven't seen it in play before, so I'm really curious how strong it is, but I just really like this card. It's a 3-mana frog with trample, plus 10 for each player who has lost the game. It also says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may mill that many cards. Put any number of land cards from among them onto the battlefield tapped. If we can then mill 3 land cards, it's a lot of ramp and also a lot of mill. We of course need to draw, but milling isn't really drawing cards because we don't really play recursion a lot, so we do need card advantage. That's where our really cool creatures step in. Ancient Silver Dragon says whenever you deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20, draw cards equal to the result. So roll 5, draw 5 cards. If you roll 15, draw 15 cards. And it also says you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game, so it can't be taken away. Arcanus just says tap it to draw 3 cards. Consecrated Sphinx says whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2. Valgavolt we already saw. Sphinx, of course, draws you just 1. Greater Good says sacrifice a creature, draw cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power, then discard 3. So it's also a bit of a mill, or at least you can put all the creatures that you don't like into your bin. So most of the time we'll cast Mimeoplasm for a power of 9. So Greater Good just says draw 9 and then discard 3 cards. Return of the Wild Speaker, an instant that also says draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. First for meaning says draw 3, then discard 2, unless you discard an enchantment. Most of the time we'll probably just discard 2 creature cards. And Windfall, well, of course, the classic. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So if you have a lot of creatures, you need a way to get them into the bin, Windfall, and get more creatures back most of the time than you discarded. If you only have lands, this is perfect as well, so you can draw some playables. We of course have the 5 infect cards that can just kick someone out of the game, but we have other ways to power up our creatures or just deal a lot of damage as well. Branching Evolution, +1 counters we put on creatures. Coma makes a Coma's Coil. Coma also says sacrifice another serpent, choose 1. Tap target permanent, its activated abilities can't be activated this turn, and you can also give Coma indestructible. The other Coma says trample and ward 4, and whenever Coma deals combat damage, create 4 serpents. We have quite a lot of evasion, so we're always gonna deal the combat damage, and the ward 4 is of course great as well, because yeah, if someone has a 2 or 3 mana removal piece, then they now need to pay 6 or 7 mana to just remove 1 creature. Massacre Worm, I really like this. You don't have the enter the battlefield, so you don't get to give your opponent's creatures -2/-2, but it still says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. So you can exile Massacre Worm and you won't use discard until someone plays a board wipe. Then you can dish a lot of damage without really having done anything for it. Born Hydra is perfect because it has trample. It enters with a +1/+1 counter. We're not gonna do it, but we are going to activate the landfall ability. Whenever a land you control enters, double +1 counters on this creature. Most of the time it's a 9/9, so now it becomes a 18/18. We have seen the frog before. We're going to put a lot of counters on our commander, and the Ozolith protects those counters, because whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, put those counters on the Ozolith. At the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from the Ozolith onto target creatures. So Mimeoplasm comes in with 9 counters. You remove those counters whenever it dies, put it onto the Ozolith. The next turn you again put 9 counters on it, but you also put the other 9 counters that are on the Ozolith now back onto your commander. So you basically double those counters. I'm really glad I just found this one. That is a treasure in this deck. Wall of Blood says it's a wall, so it can't attack, but it also says pay 1 life. Wall of Blood gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So what you can do is you switch to this creature to give it, let's say 10/10 by paying 10 life. Then you switch it back onto another creature that wants to deal combat damage or just gives you evasion. And instead of the 9/9, it's now a 19/19. Now if you think that the Infect is strong, we can also play Vage the Untouchable. Vage is a 7 mana minion creature that says when it comes into play, if you didn't play it from your hand, you lose the game. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. So you can't cheat it into play as long as Vage sees the ETB. Of course, with our commander, it won't see the ETB, so it can just transform magically into Vage and deal some combat damage with the evasion we have and straight up win, even if we only deal 3 damage. And finally, we do have 2 recursive pieces. We saw the Aftermath Analyst already. You can pay 4 to return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. We also have Shieldred that says at the beginning of your upkeep, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacrifice a creature. Well, the last ability is pretty mean, so you might just want to become a copy of Shieldred at the beginning of your upkeep. Let's say you play this Shieldred on your turn. You don't have any mana left. Now on your next turn, you have the untap step, and whenever you get to the upkeep step, you can say in response to my upkeep step, I will make the Mimeoplasm a Shieldred now, so you straight away have the upkeep trigger. And of course we need a little bit of removal as well. The Abrupt Decay says the spell can't be countered, destroy target non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less. Assassin's Trophy says destroy target permanent an opponent controls. Its controller may search your library for basic land, put it onto the battlefield. That's Shovel. Butcher of Malakir says whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. It also has flying, so this is pretty fun if someone tries to remove our Mimeoplasm and we don't have a way to protect it. Then we can just say, okay, but you all have to remove a creature as well. Track to the Roots has Delirium and it costs 2 as long as you have Delirium, and says destroy target non-land permanent. So for only 2 mana we can destroy target non-land permanent. Coma of course can tap target permanents if you have enough Coma's Coil. Quite likely because we have the other Coma as well. And then you can tap a lot of permanents and well, it's not really removing, but it's doing all the controlling that you need. Otawara. For 4 mana, you can discard it to return target artifact, creature, enchantment or planeswalker to its owner's hand, and it costs 1 less for each legendary you control. And the Shieldred, of course, if we do decide to just stick it the entire rotation, all of your opponents have to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of their upkeep. So there you have it, Mimeoplasm, Revered One. You can give it protection and some sweet static ability to really further your game plan. I have goldfished this commander quite a lot of times today, and I must say it's really fun. It's quite hard to get both the evasion and the protection and the haste on the early turns, but if you can just lay back for a little bit, it's gonna do a lot of things. I like to play Voltron. This is a kind of Voltron, but more of a laid back kind of version, because it's not gonna do a lot of damage on the early turns. You need to mill first, you need to ramp, and when you do, you really have a sweet position, because whenever someone plays a board wife, you have indestructible. When someone wants to remove it, you can play hexproof. If they can't really remove it, then we just give it infect or return it into phage. There's a lot of way you can really annoy your opponents. This is a kind of a battlecruiser commander. It does all the things Sultai does best, and I hope I got you excited as well. I want to thank you for your time, and if you have any questions, please leave them below. If I missed any cards that you think that should really be in there, leave it down below as well. For now, I would like to thank you for your time and see you on the next one.